Parade magazine, there was this article about people who avoid responding to text messages, and I saw this like psychologist name in there that I knew. Like, what? Tell me about that.
Yeah, it's an article that I collaborated with Beth Ann Meyer about.
Mhm.
She is a writer and an author. I love her because she sets such good boundaries. And so this is another piece that has to do with boundaries, right? What's okay, what's not okay? What do I have the bandwidth for? What do I not? And she's talking about individuals who sometimes will delay answering a text because
Mhm.
they're being avoidant or anxious because or they answer them immediately because they feel like there's this unspoken expectation that if you get a message you have to respond to it immediately or someone's going to get mad at you. And so like there's this whole phenomenon around how people treat their text messages and how they respond to them, and it says I think a lot about your psychological makeup, and just looking at your pattern and I think your self-talk around that can reveal how you handle your interpersonal relationships.
Oh,
So
Michael,
there you go.
link in the show notes, right?
Mhm.
I will, but Dan, I'm curious, like, where do you fall in the spectrum, right? Like, some of the questions in there are about like how quickly we respond, or,
Oh,
like, is it appropriate to like just giving like a thumbs up to something, or is it okay just to not respond sometimes? Like, it's interesting thinking about the dynamics of texting,
I
I think.
think I think a text message is some response is necessary, and I think a text message has a short timeline response, but not necessarily a mandatory timeline response. Like sometimes you need to think about things, and sometimes you and some people I like some of my friends I know are going to text back immediately, and some like I may wait a day or so. But I think a text message is a conversation. And conversations, if someone says to you like hi, you don't like ignore them. You don't and I like the phrase the kids have these days, don't leave me on red.
Yeah.
And I haven't read
But what's worse is when you're red and
yeah.
you know you're red and
Right,
there's no
right. So
response.
don't leave me on red.
Ooh.
Is really goes to say like there is a
Yeah.
social expectation of a response, and I think a response within a very reasonable and fairly short time frame, as in when you have a chance to next respond. The only time I leave someone on red and don't respond is I'll look at it and go, "Oh, I need to think about that," and then like, "Oh shit, 2 days has passed and I didn't respond, and then I feel terrible
Mhm.
because I know I've left them on red, and that's not okay." Um, but I think there's a reasonable expectation of a response. And yes, a thumbs up can be a complete response. Often it's the way to like, okay, we're done now, But I think a
Yeah, because
thumbs
sometimes
up
you're in
is,
that text message thread and now you're like, I just want to be out of this.
yeah, I
I
want to
just
be
want
out, and
to
that's
I want to
fine.
be done.
It's fine to like. I think a thumbs up is just fine.
Mhm.
As a like, okay, we're done now, and we have those really good social cues in real life. And we don't. It's hard to do it in text messages because you can't do that like that says that or the Minnesota way that you know that very minute
Yeah.
smack in the heart that says it's time to leave. We don't necessarily have some of those social cues
Yeah.
text message, so we have to come up with them. And the thumbs up is certainly a reasonable social cue that says the conversation is complete and I really don't have anything more to add. But I agree with you. So
And
yeah,
I find the same is true. It bridges over into instant messaging, like on
yeah,
Teams at work or in Slack, where you have kind of a similar etiquette,
mhm,
which is respond if it needs some thought, maybe even tell them that. And if we're going to wrap this part of the conversation up, that thumbs up to just kind of slowly
yeah,
exit and
yeah.
let
No,
that
I,
piece of
I,
the
I
conversation.
but I do think a text message does. There's an expectation of a reasonably brisk response. Not immediate, but like within a reasonable period of time for a person to respond. But a full response might be, "I'll give me get back to you."
And I will say there are always exceptions to the rule.
Of course. But
Anyway, Michael.
generally speaking,
Yeah.
Of course.
Well,
All
welcome
right.
both
So
of
this
you.
is not a
Thanks.
podcast about texting and replying. This is a podcast about psychological insights and relationships. Michael, why don't you tell our listeners what rabbit hole they have fallen in if they have not been in this rabbit hole before?
Hey, this could be one about texting. You don't know because I
This is
literally don't
no,
true.
tell you guys ahead of time. But um, Yeah, for anybody who's new out there, basically what I've done is I've gone out on the internet, I found a scenario where somebody has asked, who's the asshole here? And that's what we're going to talk about today. Dan and Gayle bring their expertise and, as best they can, offer some kind of judgment guidance, unpack the scenario. That's the thing they do best that I really appreciate. And, in general, I've gone through and I've de identified the post a bit to make it a little more discreet. And then after the credits, we always have some kind of bonus conversation. I don't know what that'll be, but we'll find out towards that part of it. So stick around through the credits. Yeah, I guess that's it, right? I'm trying to think if I missed
Well,
anything.
I think you hit all of the notes, Michael. I would just like to take a moment to welcome my friend and business partner,
Oh,
Dan. We have been friends for, I've lost track, 12 or 13 years. We've been business
Like that.
partners for just over two, and colleagues for, I don't know, as long as we've been friends. And we've always really appreciated having these kind of nuanced conversations, kind of, pushing and pulling each other, and honestly making each other, I think, better psychologists. And it's a lot of fun to do this with a friend of mine. So welcome to this morning's podcast with me. I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, and what's interesting about people don't necessarily a little bit of background into our field. One of the things that we do a lot of in the field of psychology or psychotherapy is process challenging or sometimes not challenging, well, challenging with each other, sometimes for personally challenging, sometimes challenging with colleagues. And we talk about like, this is a really tough situation, or this was a really hard day, or this was, and we do a lot of this. We also do a lot of like, hey, I want to make sure I'm on the right path here. And that is something that I really appreciate, and is something that I think any good therapist is going to have. Even those who are in solitary, solo private practice, you almost always have a group of folks that they sit down with and and process the more challenging moments with. And I think it always makes us better. And so part of what we're doing here today is a bit of what we do in processing those. So you're getting a little bit of insight, although probably with more cursing.
Well, right. And with
Yeah.
fake cases.
Oh yeah, and fake stuff. Well, we
But,
assume that they're real.
well, we assume that they're real. They are not our
They're
clients.
not our clients. But
But
every
they are
once in a while,
representative of the problems that we see, and it gives us an opportunity to talk with an audience in a safe way without sharing anybody's identifiable information.
Michael, tell us more. What are we talking
yeah,
about today?
for sure. Yeah. So this one is, am I the asshole if I charge my girlfriend $1,000 for rent while I pay $2,000?
We
Why do
need
people?
more.
There is. Wait, he pays 2,000 and she pays 1,000, or he pays 2,000 and she pays 1,000. So now they each pay 1,000, and like,
It's not clear if
there's
rent
not
is
enough.
3,000 or if it's 2,000. Like, we
We
need
need
more,
Oh,
more.
Michael,
yeah,
please.
We need more.
for
Please.
sure.
No,
So,
we can't even render a snap judgment like I sometimes do.
these are boyfriend girlfriend. The boyfriend is the poster. They are late 20s. Yeah, late 20s. And so he says, we've been together for 2 years and we're talking about moving in together. We live in Southern California, so rent is no joke. We've been looking at places in the $1,800 to $2,500 range, which honestly seems low to me, but for that area.
It
And
does seem low.
Well, you get a solid 600 square feet.
Yeah, I doubt it.
Um, and he says, and I've told her I'm willing to take on the bigger chunk, around $2,000, if she can chip in at least $1,000 to help cover rent, utilities, and food. I don't think that's unreasonable considering how expensive everything is. But now she's saying she doesn't want the pressure of contributing that much while she's studying for nursing school. She's offered maybe $500 instead and said other guys support their girlfriends fully while they're in school without expecting money. I'm not trying to make her feel bad or stressed, but I also don't think I should be covering nearly everything. I've got my career going, yes, but is it really unfair to ask her to contribute something more substantial if we are sharing a home? Am I the asshole for expecting her to help out more financially?
Well, maybe, but as asked, probably not. I mean, it's tricky to move in together because by virtue of sharing that kind of space, even if you're just platonic roommates, you do start to blend some finances and financial means. And you need to have, I think, a clear cut expectation and outline of responsibilities. And if one party says, hey, what you've asked me to pitch in here, I can't do, then that's the beginning of the conversation. It's you're not the asshole for asking or wanting that from her. But I think you do get into asshole territory if you then continue to insist something beyond her means. Now, I don't love her answer, which is no, if we're moving in together, I'm expecting you to do much more to take care of me, unless there has been some sort of other previous conversation where in which he has promised like, hey, I've got some ability to financially support you here, because they're not married. And even then, like, I think that's got to be a bigger conversation about how we're contributing. I don't know, I'm blathering on. Dan, what are you've got
No, I,
thoughts?
I I do have thoughts, and this comes up fairly often in couples work. And the question here is, what's the right way to handle finances within a coupled relationship? And the answer is what works best for that couple together. I certainly see couples where they keep their money completely separately, and each of them has a separate pot of money. Each of them contributes in some formula, sometimes 50-50, sometimes in a different way. I see couples and talk to people who have one pot of money that they just put all their money into and then spend everything out of, and it's like truly like whatever, it doesn't, it's all our, every dollar is our money. And then couples who do like the three pot method, where like there's our money and then there's each of our individual monies, and all of these work, and all of these are fine if it works for the couple. And what we have here, I think, is not anyone being an asshole, but two people who view the way it should be done differently. And Gayle, how often are we dealing with couples where the argument isn't about right and wrong? Well, they're framing it as right and wrong, but really what we're talking about is they have a differing perspective and both are valid.
I agree to some extent, but I'm going to push back a little bit because I think she has an unrealistic expectation. As two people who are dating and they live in separate households, she is somehow managing her own finances.
Mm.
And that when she moves in with boyfriend, there's a shift in that. And I would be curious with this couple to understand how we go from position A to then position B in her world. Is that the enticement to move in is I get to save and I have less financial burden. I take fewer loans for nursing school, et cetera, et cetera. But where is that expectation coming from? And is there a way in which he feels good about that? You know, she
Hmm.
seems to be coming in with this idea of I have a boyfriend and I'm going to be a bit gendered about this and he's just going to take care of me. And it
I,
feels a little icky. I'm not
I
liking
think,
that.
yeah. So her wording certainly leans into that.
Yes.
And I'm being a bit forgiving of her wording. Um, what I did as I heard it, and maybe this is unfair, is I did some flipping here because I didn't want to necessarily assume gender, although they gendered themselves here. But like I would say that rather than a lot of boyfriends support their girlfriends, which certainly has that feel that may make us both uncomfortable, like a lot of people will support their partner through graduate school or through some schooling program. And in doing so, like that's if they're talking about a long-term relationship, like this is a couple, it really depends on where they are in their relationship. If this is a
They're
couple who's leaning
identifying
into,
as boyfriend, girlfriend, and again, like girlfriend, girlfriend, boyfriend, boyfriend, whatever.
right, yeah.
But that sort of has a feel that has less longevity than this is my partner.
Mhm.
This is like they sort of kept a
Um,
little bit of a distance in there. And maybe she sees it as partnering and he sees it as boyfriend girlfriend. And so he sees it as
I
maybe a little less serious than she does,
Well, yeah, and I've certainly
which can
seen
happen
people who
too.
I've certainly seen folks and talked to folks in my personal life who've been married for 20 years and still keep two separate pots of money and split things up. And that's fine and legitimate if that works for that couple. It's not necessarily the paradigm that I ascribe to in my personal life or that I necessarily think is best, but that's also my own bias. But I think, this is a couple who's leaning into like maybe, and I'm gonna go, maybe she was living with her parents and this is an increase in costs. Maybe she's living on her own and this represents a decrease in costs. But I think about the longevity of this relationship, and if this is a relationship that's tracking towards marriage, um, I think it's quite reasonable for him to cover, or if he was in nursing school, for her to cover the lion's share of the expenses.
I don't
But
disagree.
if they're a couple who's recently together, or not, they've been together 2 years, but this is a couple who's like just kind of testing out the living together, maybe not so much. So it depends on
Yeah,
where they
I think that's exactly where I'm getting hung up on this, Dan, is it feels like they're just now testing out living together, and there's an expectation of more assistance from the partner who
are.
has a solid career position, job, whatever, and you have the other partner in school. Take gender out of it because I don't
Yes,
think it matters. I think that at the end of the day, if we don't have the solidification of this relationship to something more in the future, whether that be marriage or a long-term partnership or whatever that is, we're just 2 years in, and this is a recipe for resentment. I see these couples in my office. They get together, they have these expectations, they help out, whatever, and then this becomes an argument point later on down the road. You expected me to cover this, or I covered this and you never, you never engage in reciprocity in any other way. Like this, I feel like because they're kind of newer and they're testing out this, this would be a great time to come into therapy and explore what this means, what their intentions are, and really get some clarity around this agreement and help them really navigate this in a way that feels good for both of them. I'm not saying they shouldn't do it. I'm saying that the fact that we have a post on the internet about it says they have not had the conversation,
conversation.
right?
No, they.
So this is spiraling into a terrible rom-com.
I think it sounds like they had a conversation that escalated, and I think where they missed isn't necessarily not having the conversation. I think what they missed is in hearing each other's perspectives as valid.
Yes.
Because I think it's perfectly legit for him to say to her, the total expense of this place is going to be 3 grand. I make more than you. You're in school. I'd like you to kick in 1 grand because I don't know if I can swing it otherwise. And it's perfectly legit for her to say, I can't do that. I don't want to
Yeah.
do that. If I'm going to live with you, best I can come up with like 500 a month because I got all these other expenses. And now it's like, okay, let's talk about whether or not like how to make this work, or what we can't make it work.
Well,
But it's a
and
conversation.
because I'm in nursing school, now this is going to be temporary,
Hmm.
right? This is a
Hmm.
1, 2, 3 year agreement. And when I'm through with school and I've achieved my first professional opinion position, can we renegotiate and can we talk about what my contribution looks like at that time? I'm going to assume longevity of this relationship and that will shift it because I could also see him being a little weary of like, okay, so I'm pitching in, 2 grand, you get 500, and then, and that's the way it's just going to be, and that's going to feel inequitable. There we go, inequitable to me over the long run. So let's put a caveat in there that we're going to renegotiate this.
Absolutely. And I think that what I find happens so often with couples is that they're arguing about who's right when the answer is they're both right.
Yes.
I mean, both of these folks are totally legit, but they're getting locked into their positions and
Yes.
not able to hear each other's perspectives in a way that's meaningful. And they're trying to figure out, they're stuck in trying to figure out which one of them is right.
Yes. No, I agree.
And
And
that's a
I've
fail.
probably
That is
said it.
almost always a fail.
Right. I've probably said it here. I certainly say it a lot of times to couples, which is I've got some good news and I've got bad news.
Yeah,
Here's the good news. You're both right. Here's the bad news.
you're
You're
both
both
right.
right.
Exactly. And now you
Now
have
what
to
do we do with
navigate it.
that?
But we navigate these things all the time. If one person is more religious than the other, or becomes more religious than the other, or becomes less religious than the other, or one person
Mhm.
realizes, you know what, I've worked with couples where he's like, I can't imagine living a life without children. And she's like, I just can't imagine a situation where I'd want to bring a child into the world. I don't think I would do a good job with it. And they're both like, they both thought it through. They both processed it. Neither's making a snap judgment. But there's where you have every right to say I don't want to have children. You have every right to say I don't think I could live without having children. And so both people are right, and they'll come in and try to figure out who's right. Well, they're no one's wrong. but now
Right.
how do you manage this? And sometimes it's not tenable. Like
Right.
there's not a halfway point between having children and not having children. Like
Right.
dogs are great, but it's not going to cut it. And for most people at least. And so then the
Mhm.
couple has to figure out if they can do it one way or the other. If they can't, how they're going to manage a separation or the resentment or whatever. And these are the conversations to have.
And I would even offer that these are not just unique issues to new couples.
No.
Sometimes couples who've been together for a very long time all of a sudden find themselves in a position where something has shifted for them or changed, or they've just not come up against this.
Yeah.
One of the persons in the couple just has a new hobby that just really interferes with the happiness and well-being of the other. And I don't want to accept this anymore.
Right.
And it's
Yeah.
it's impacting my life, and I don't like this.
Right.
So it's interesting. You can see couples who've been together 40 plus years who have these now all of a sudden new issues pop up, and they
Yeah.
think, well, how did we get this far?
Right.
Usually those folks do have a really good template to work from to address those changes. And we can, as therapists, we can prompt them on that template. What have you done in the past in these hard kinds of situations to resolve this? And I think having those years together does increase your ability to maybe be successful with that if you can access that template. So maybe that's why new couples are a bit more prone to this. But I
Mhm.
just wanted to make the point that it's not just a new couple issue that
No.
you find ourselves in
And
these positions of having differing perspectives.
I'll beat you to the punch on this because both of us usually come to this at some point. What is it? 65% of all conflicts within relationships don't get resolved.
Oh, it's even higher than that. It's
What?
69%.
69%. All right. All right.
I'm gonna be 12 on that one. Yeah, 69% of all conflicts in a relationship never get solved.
So if that's the case,
And that comes, wait, no, I gotta say it. It comes from John Gottman, and he's a
right,
relationship optimist. He thinks almost any relationship can work except for ones in which there are ongoing affairs or ongoing abuse. That's a
right.
relationship optimist, and he's still telling us 70% of conflict isn't gonna get solved. Then what the hell are we doing?
Well, we're not trying. Well, the problem is, and this happens so often, is that the couples are trying to resolve the conflict
Right.
rather than develop a template for coping for the reality that this conflict can't be resolved. And how do we continue living together and loving each other and getting along well when we have to manage, you know, only resolving our disagreements 31% of the time?
Yeah.
And that's like I've the number of times since running across that data point, I've been talking to a couple and I've told them, I usually say a two-thirds. Maybe I'm less a middle school boy than you are, Gail.
I
Um,
could be kind of a middle school boy
you-
because humor just spikes a little bit of dopamine, and it's a point you're going to remember.
so
So I
maybe I should go
do.
back to that and say
Mhm.
that like 69, 69
I think it
percent,
plays better from a girl therapist than a boy
probably.
therapist.
Yeah, probably. Maybe
But
I'll stick.
anyway.
I'll stick with two-thirds. But if we say that the two-thirds don't get resolved, but I've had a number of couples I've said that to, and you've
Mhm.
probably had the same experience. They'll be like, oh, and like
Right.
this sudden weight is taken off of them. Oh,
Right.
you mean we don't have to fix our arg? We're not supposed because we have this ideal that we're supposed to keep hashing it out until we come to a resolution. Not gonna fucking happen most of the time. And if it's not gonna happen, let's stop trying to resolve this and figure out how to live within this lack of resolution that's going to happen two-thirds of the time.
Yes. And living within that resolution means being empathetic to your partner's
Mhm.
position, not being condescending that your position is right and their position is wrong or better or worse, but simply allowing for both to be true.
And
Yeah.
so with this couple, they're in a tough spot though because you can't like this is a dollar thing,
Yeah.
and they're going to have to find some resolution that is satisfactory and meets both of their needs. And their needs are for her to have very limited costs so that she can afford nursing school, and the need for him is to be able to afford a place between the two combined incomes. And then how do they figure out what number can do both of those
Yeah.
things? And they
I
may or
would
may not be able to.
probably I would probably be walking them through needs and wants for each
Mhm.
individual
Yeah. Yeah.
and have some time to explore the differences between needs and wants, because there's a lot of data here as a therapist that I'm just missing that I
Yeah.
don't know that I can call anybody an asshole, because there is just kind of a big question mark. And we do find that people tend to post these and put themselves in the
Mhm.
best possible position. So I think he's probably glossed over a little bit of how he, couched this and
Like,
phrased this, and
probably.
maybe even vilified her a little bit because he's
Yeah.
unhappy with her
Oh,
response.
totally.
And so
Totally.
I'm really not gonna say that anybody sucks here. I think there's just not enough information to render any kind of verdict one way or
I
another. I think this is definitely the place to start a conversation.
Yeah, and I'm gonna make some assumptions here about where they're coming from and where they posted this. And I'm operating from the assumption this is like so many of those where people get stuck in their position rather than focusing on the what they really need, as you mentioned. Um, and I'm gonna say that both of them have, at least to start out with, very reasonable expectations or desires, and they're just at a different place. And then
Hmm.
the argument escalated. And I'll go a step. You said you're not ready. I'm going to say nobody sucks, and no one said no assholes here.
No assholes here,
I'm
and
going to
I'm
say
just
no
saying not
assholes
enough
here.
information.
I'm going to say no assholes here. And what this couple really needs is to step back and try to empathize and understand the other's perspective so that they can come to a resolution that's going to work for both of them. But I don't think they're assholes for not being able to do that. I think that's where they are right now. So I'm making a little bit of assumption.
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
the information you're saying is not there, I'm assuming is there, and I'm saying there are no assholes here. So we're mostly on the same page with a little bit of,
Mostly,
yeah.
mostly, but I think
Michael,
they've got some work to do.
what the internet say? Because they tend to be judgy.
Yeah, well, first I want to go back to the humor thing really quick. One of my very favorite quotes from one of my favorite comedians, George Carlin, talked about how he constructed his comedy to make people laugh, and then when they're laughing, you slip truth in. And they are most
Mhm.
vulnerable when they're laughing about something. And so
Hmm.
it's an opportunity to change minds in that moment. So,
I
I
love it.
think I think by the way, the other person who does this really well is Hannah Gadsby, as she builds tension and she tells you how she's building the tension and then she makes you laugh. If you haven't watched Hannah Gadsby, it can be hard to watch because of the truth that she talks about. But she's a
Mm.
brilliant comedian.
No, yeah, and I don't know Hannah Gadsby. I'll have to look her up, but I definitely, George Carlin's Occupation Fool was one of my first albums I owned, I think, and I probably shouldn't have been listening to it at the age I was listening to it, and maybe he's responsible for my potty mouth today. Um,
Thank you, George,
yeah,
wherever you are.
of,
so
of blessed memory.
it,
Michael, tell us what the internet said.
So the internet was I mean this was one where I felt like you guys kind of came to the consensus that they nobody really ultimately sucks here. But the internet was very much split on either not the asshole or you're the asshole. And the not the asshole, no assholes or everybody sucks here is like a outlier. So it's interesting. There are so many people who said, you're not the asshole. You're asking for what you need, what you need. This is a financial part of the relationship that needs to be ironed out early. If she's not ready to pay rent, then she's not ready to move out. All that stuff. Like she needs to have some skin in the game, to like feel ownership over this as well. But you also need to not feel like you're bearing the full burden of the financial expense because that is going to set up resentment and those kind of things. And then the you are the asshole here is your girlfriend is setting a firm boundary about what she needs and wants. She's not wrong for putting her education first, and nursing school is particularly competitive and there are lots of expenses that you might not be thinking about. And if you want her to move in and you can afford it, then you should support it now and help her get through that part. And then on the other end, kind of reassess after she's done with school. So those were kind of like the big
Mm.
camps on the internet. Um,
I think the way the internet wrote those out really reinforces what Dan and I were saying is there's no wrong way to do this except for to leave it at as a point of resentment and leaving that unaddressed.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
That's the wrong place. But as the internet has kind of showed us, and it would be curious to see how many answers, broke out one way or another. There isn't a wrong, right or wrong here.
No, and money can be a really tough sticking point in part because there isn't a right way to do it. I know the way that works for me in my relationship. And fortunately for us, we were actually talking about this the other day, my wife and I, that like we just happen to have the exact same perspective on the best way to handle finances in a relationship. And so it worked really well for us because we was like,
Right.
okay, that's what we do. And, um, but I also know that it would have been a challenge had one of us been I see it as best, and one of them been the other way that we both see it as from the way, like, how would we have met? That might have been a tough thing for us to manage.
Well, and I think too, it's also knowing who you are as a spender and a saver. I think, similar, I'm sort of lucky to be married to someone who has a really kind of similar balance in terms of spending and saving and how we handle money. And that works really, really well. But
I'm not going to claim that we've always agreed on the correct
well,
way, on the
well,
correct, on the value of certain things and the correct way to spend. I'm just saying, in the way
I
of
just mean
handling the money
overall
overall.
philosophically, not purchase for
Just in
purchase
case my
or
wife is listening to this podcast, I'm not claiming that we agree on everything.
no. But what I'm saying is sometimes the perspective that you hold about how to handle the money, pots, one pot versus two versus three, really also depends on who you're in the relationship with, and not just whether or not they agree on one, two, or three, but how they manage those pots. And so sometimes the two or the three option works way better, even though my preference would be for one pot.
Right.
If you're
Right.
married to someone who really handles that pot differently, then you really would prefer, I think, two or three pots, just for some other psychological reasons, some emotional reasons.
Yeah.
None of them are wrong.
One of the interesting side conversations here really was about, it started with what are the unexpected expenses of nursing school, which went into things like having to buy embroidered scrubs and then mandatory school polos for Zoom calls to look professional. And then they couldn't even start clinicals unless their gear was 100% compliant. And there were like all these things that then spiraled down to these additional costs of the American education system. And then
don't get me started there.
It just went all over the place. It was kind of hilarious. But yeah, for the most part, that's I think you guys did a really good job of talking about like the complications of this situation. And finances are one of those things that people disagree with, and it is sometimes a deal breaker, I think, too. So get it ironed out sooner, I guess. But anyway, thank you both for another riveting debate and a glimpse into the collective conscience of the internet forums. Remember, morality and finances are often shades of gray and not just black or white.
And, nursing school is expensive and living in California is too. Negotiate these things. Have a conversation, people.
Yeah. Please follow and share Veritas Views on the podcast platforms with your neighbors and friends. And as always, stick around through the credits for the bonus conversation about, I don't know, we'll see what it is.
You can follow Dr. Dan Kessler at Dr. Dan Kessler and Dr. Gayle MacBride at Dr. G. MacBride. Oh, and you can find them both at veritaspp.com. Credits. Tickling the Ivories, Matthew Reddington. Art, production, and design, bringing the show together with flair and finesse, Michelle Love. Recording and editing, turning chaos into something worth sharing, Michael McBride. Intro, outro, I'm Kelly Buttrick, a VO talent who just happens to be Dr. McBride's cousin. Cats, CJ, Linus, Sadie, and Griffin. Hosting by whomever lost the coin flip. Interruptions by all their children. The content of this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Listening to this podcast does not constitute a therapist-client relationship. If you believe you may be experiencing a mental health issue, please seek the assistance of a qualified mental health professional. If you are experiencing a mental health crisis, you can call or text 988 from anywhere in the U.S. to be connected to Crisis Mental Health Services.
Thanks for listening. As promised, here's that bonus conversation.
Can I ask 1 pot, 2 pot, or 3 pot? And I'll volunteer. I'll volunteer 1 pot in my house.
Yes.
We do 1 pot. Yeah.
1 pot. I think because Dan, you and I are really similar. So I'm assuming some things here now at your house that money conversations for us need to be transparent. Mm-hmm. And 1 pot then really leans into that, right? Because then we have discussions about that. And quite frankly, having two sets of eyes on it just has saved our bacon more often than not. So one pot makes a lot of sense. And we were luckily in pretty lockstep in agreement with that. But that's not necessarily how I grew up either.
I'm throwing this question out to our mailbag. I'm really curious from folks, what works best for you? One pot of money for the couple, or and everything comes out of that. Everything goes into it, everything comes out of it. Two pots where you each keep your money completely separate, or three pots where some portion of it goes into the middle, and then you keep your own money for your own things. So I'm curious.
And I'm going to actually complicate that question then, which is, if you're a 1, 2, or 3 potter, did you grow up in a household of 1, 2, or 3? Or do you know? Do you know what kind of pot system your parents use, your household use? Now, that is making an assumption there's a 2-income household here, and I know a lot of people didn't grow up in 2-income households, so I get that too. But just think about how your own upbringing influences your preference for pots.
All right.
Yeah, I love that. It is a really interesting conversation, and it's always funny when I find it most interesting when you connect with people and you assume a level of like similarity, and then you find out something that is drastically different, like the money pot thing. You're like, oh, you keep separate accounts. Interesting. Tell me more about that,
Well, for me, what was always interesting is the one pot and one person of the couple managed that one pot. So the expectation was that one individual would contribute to the pot and has an incredible amount of trust in that individual that managed the pot. And I can think of several examples of where that worked really, really well. I'm not even shitting on the idea. I think it worked really well.
I think that the key to all of this is back to our whole conversation is that what works for the couple.
What works for you, and you have conversations about, I'm going to trust you to do this. And then, quite frankly, if you're the person in charge, you need to be really trustworthy and follow through.
Definitely. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. Tune in again next week for a whole nother Am I the Asshole debate.
We love hearing from you, so please review us on Apple, Spotify, or, well, wherever you're listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, please review, like, and follow. Also, give it a share. This helps us reach more listeners.